There is a reason someone fell for you so intensely that even they may not fully understand what happened. And if you have been feeling a strange emotional pull lately, if someone's energy around you feels heavy, confusing, intense, or impossible to ignore, this may explain everything. Because sometimes a person does not simply like you. They do not casually become attached to you. Sometimes they fall so hard, so unexpectedly, that it begins to frighten them. Their feelings become bigger than what they know how to control. And what makes this even more complicated is that the very reasons they fell in love with you may be the exact reasons they now seem distant, guarded, or emotionally overwhelmed. This is what most people miss. They assume intensity creates closeness. But in psychology, especially in matters of the heart, intensity often creates fear before it creates connection. What makes someone fall dangerously in love is rarely about beauty alone, chemistry alone, or timing alone. It usually happens when something inside them is touched at a level far deeper than attraction. It happens when you awaken something sleeping in their inner world, something they had buried, something they stopped believing in. Carl Jung understood that love often becomes most powerful when another person activates hidden parts of the psyche, the neglected self, the wounded self, the unlived self. And when that happens, love stops feeling simple. It becomes transformative. It becomes unsettling because suddenly they are not just reacting to you. They are reacting to everything inside themselves that your presence brought to the surface. That is why what feels like love can sometimes look like withdrawal, confusion, or resistance. The first reason someone fell so intensely in love with you is something many women underestimate about themselves. It was not what you gave them, it was what they felt in your presence. There is a difference. Some people attract attention by trying hard to be loved. They over-explain, over-give, over-accommodate, and over-perform emotionally. But you, whether you realized it or not, carried something far more powerful. Emotional depth without performance. Presence without chasing. Warmth without desperation. That combination is rare, extremely rare. And for someone who has spent years around emotionally unavailable people, emotionally manipulative people, or emotionally shallow connections, your presence felt almost disorienting. They felt seen without being pressured, felt warmth without being controlled, felt closeness without emotional force. That kind of emotional experience can shake a person more than obvious passion ever could. Because obvious passion is easy to understand. Desire is familiar. Chemistry is explainable. But being emotionally safe around someone when you have spent years protecting yourself, that can feel dangerous. Especially for someone who learned that closeness usually comes with pain. They may have built an identity around self-protection, around emotional control, around never needing too much. Then you arrived, and somehow, without trying to break their walls, you made those walls feel unnecessary. That is terrifying for someone whose defenses became their survival. They may not say this out loud, but part of them likely thought, why do I feel calmer around this person? Why do I want to stay? Why do I feel more like myself? And the moment those questions begin, attachment begins. This is the paradox most people never understand. Sometimes someone pulls away, not because they feel less, but because they feel too much. When a person has spent years suppressing emotion, real connection does not feel romantic at first. It feels destabilizing. Their nervous system does not always recognize safety as safe. It may even interpret emotional peace as vulnerability. So instead of leaning in, they become conflicted. They overthink every interaction. They analyze every word. They question whether what they feel is real. They try to regain emotional control. Yet underneath all of that, the truth remains unchanged. They fell because with you, they experienced something they could not manufacture, emotional relief. And that leads to the second reason, the one that often shocks people the most. They fell dangerously in love with you because you reflected a part of themselves they had abandoned long ago. This is where Jung's insight becomes powerful. We do not only fall in love with another person, We often fall in love with the parts of ourselves we see through them, the hidden parts, the forgotten parts, the disowned parts, your energy, your way of feeling, your emotional honesty, your quiet strength. Something in you mirrored a version of them they once were, or a version they desperately wished they could become. That mirror effect is incredibly powerful because it bypasses logic. They may not even consciously understand why you affect them so strongly. They only know something about you feels deeply familiar and strangely meaningful. Maybe your softness reminded them of innocence they lost. Maybe your emotional courage reminded them how much they had been suppressing. Maybe your authenticity exposed how exhausting their emotional mask had become. Whatever it was, being around you created internal contrast, and contrast creates awakening. Suddenly, they could feel the gap between who they were pretending to be and who they truly were underneath. That gap can be painful, because awakening does not feel beautiful at first. It feels uncomfortable. It forces honesty. It reveals loneliness. It exposes emotional hunger. And if they have spent years functioning through avoidance, numbness, or ego control, your presence became impossible to ignore because you disrupted that emotional routine. This is why some people become strangely obsessed after meeting someone meaningful, not because they are irrational, but because something deep in their psyche has been activated. They begin thinking about you at unusual times. Random moments trigger memories. Songs feel different. Nights feel heavier. Silence becomes louder. They tell themselves to stop thinking about you, yet their mind returns again and again. Why? Because unresolved inner material seeks integration. Your presence became associated with something emotionally unfinished inside them. And until they face that inner truth, they cannot fully move on. Not from you, and not from what you represent. What makes this even more intense is that the ego often resists this process. The ego wants familiarity, predictability, control. It wants emotional safety through distance. But love, real transformative love, often threatens ego structures. It says you cannot remain unchanged. That is why someone can love you and still resist you. They may sabotage closeness, delay communication, become inconsistent, act colder than they feel. Not because their feelings disappeared, but because inner resistance is fighting emotional transformation. Part of them wants to surrender, another part wants to run. This inner war can make their behavior seem contradictory. One day warm, another day distant, one moment open, next moment guarded. And if you have been confused by this inconsistency, I want you to hear something carefully. Inconsistency does not automatically mean manipulation. Sometimes it means unresolved fear. Of course, unhealthy behavior should never be romanticized, but emotional contradiction often reveals internal conflict more than lack of care. A person who feels nothing usually stays simple. Indifference is predictable. Emotional chaos often signals attachment mixed with fear. The problem is not always the feeling. The problem is the capacity to hold the feeling, and not everyone has developed that capacity, especially people who learned early in life that needing others was dangerous. There is usually a wound beneath emotional avoidance, a wound connected to rejection, abandonment, criticism, betrayal, or emotional neglect. Over time, that wound becomes a defense system. Do not need too much. Do not trust too quickly. Do not reveal too much. Then love arrives. Not soft, manageable affection, but powerful, emotional attachment. Suddenly, every defense is challenged. Every old belief gets tested. The person may not consciously think about childhood or attachment patterns, but their body remembers. Their nervous system remembers. So even while love grows, fear grows too. This is why dangerous love does not only feel intoxicating, it also feels exposing. And yet, there is a third reason someone fell for you so intensely. This may be the most powerful reason of all. It has nothing to do with what you said, nothing to do with what you promised, nothing to do with how available you were. It has to do with what they felt when they imagined losing you. Pay attention to this. People often understand their love most clearly when separation becomes real. As long as someone feels they have time, they can remain emotionally lazy. They can delay honesty. They can avoid vulnerability. They can stay inside ambiguity. But the moment they sense emotional distance, the moment they feel you pulling your energy back, the moment they realize you may stop waiting, something profound happens. Fantasy collides with reality. Denial collapses. Emotional truth sharpens. That is when many people finally recognize the depth of their attachment, not when everything feels available, when loss becomes possible. And if this person became more emotionally intense after sensing your withdrawal, if they became more watchful, more reactive, more restless, more emotionally affected by your absence, there is a reason your absence forced emotional clarity. Sometimes, someone does not realize how deeply they love you until they feel what life might be without you in it. The imagined loss becomes unbearable because it reveals emotional dependency they were hiding even from themselves. This is the third reason they fell dangerously in love with you. You became emotionally irreplaceable, not perfect, not idealized, not because you solved everything, but because something about the emotional experience of you became uniquely meaningful in their inner world. People can replace attention, replace distraction, replace temporary comfort, but they struggle to replace emotional resonance. And emotional resonance is rare. It happens when someone touches your soul structure in a way few people ever do. It happens when being understood no longer feels theoretical. It feels lived. That kind of bond changes people. And here is where things become deeply revealing. When someone realizes you are emotionally irreplaceable, one of two things happens. Either love matures into courage, or fear intensifies into avoidance. There is usually no neutral middle, because once emotional truth becomes undeniable, the psyche must choose, move toward connection or strengthen defense. Some people become brave, others become even more avoidant, but both reactions come from the same source, emotional significance. This is why the most confusing behavior often comes from the person who feels the most. They may watch from a distance, check indirectly, feel everything privately, miss you intensely, but say nothing, love you powerfully, yet remain silent. Because the deeper truth is not simply that they love you. The deeper truth is that loving you forced them to confront something they have avoided for years, and that something is their own inability to receive the very love they have spent their life craving, because wanting love and receiving love are not the same psychological experience. Many people long for intimacy and fantasy, but struggle with intimacy in reality. Fantasy feels safe because there is no true surrender. Real love demands presence, honesty, emotional exposure, accountability. And if someone carries shame, fear, or unhealed wounds, receiving genuine love can feel almost unbearable, which means the greatest obstacle between you and them may never have been timing, distance, or circumstances. It may have been the moment they realized that if they let themselves fully love you, they would also have to face the parts of themselves they have spent years hiding, the parts that believe they are not worthy of being loved at all. And when that belief gets touched, everything changes, because a person can only run for so long before they are forced to confront the real question buried beneath all avoidance. What if the reason I keep pulling away is not because I don't love them? What if it's because I am terrified they will see everything I have worked so hard to hide and still leave? That is the question many people never say out loud, yet it silently shapes the way they love. It sits beneath delayed messages, emotional distance, mixed signals, and moments that feel painfully inconsistent. From the outside, it can look like indecision, but inside, something far deeper is happening. A person who has learned to survive through emotional control does not fear love because love is weak. They fear love because love has the power to expose what control has been protecting. And what has been protected all these years is often not arrogance, not coldness, not indifference, but vulnerability, layered beneath defense. The part of them that still remembers rejection. The part that still carries old grief. The part that quietly believes that if someone gets close enough, they will eventually discover something unlovable. This is why dangerous love can feel almost unbearable to the person experiencing it. You did not simply attract them, you reached places inside them that had gone untouched for years. Places they themselves stopped visiting. Places covered in rationalizations, distractions, achievements, routines, and emotional habits designed to keep life manageable. Then you came into their world, and suddenly emotions they had neatly organized no longer stayed in their boxes. They felt more, thought more, remembered more. Even their inner voice changed. Something in them became more awake. And with awakening comes discomfort, because once the heart begins telling the truth, the mind can no longer pretend nothing matters. This is where many people misunderstand emotional withdrawal. They assume distance means disinterest, but often distance appears right after emotional significance becomes undeniable. Why? Because the person is trying to regain equilibrium. They feel themselves losing control of a carefully constructed internal system. They begin asking questions that frighten them. Why do I care this much? Why does their silence affect me? Why does their energy stay with me long after they leave? Why do I keep returning to thoughts of them when I am trying so hard to move forward? These questions do not feel romantic when you are avoidant. They feel threatening because every question points towards surrender, and surrender is exactly what the defended psyche resists. Jung wrote about the shadow, the parts of ourselves we suppress, deny, or exile from conscious identity. But here is something people often miss. The shadow does not only contain darkness, it also contains buried tenderness, buried needs, buried vulnerability, buried longing, and even buried love. Many people have not suppressed only pain, they have suppressed their capacity for emotional openness. They became strong by becoming unreachable. They became functional by becoming emotionally self-contained. They survived by convincing themselves they did not need much. But then, someone like you appears, and the shadow opens. Suddenly, their need for closeness becomes visible. Their hunger for connection becomes undeniable. Their softness returns, and that can feel deeply destabilizing. The tragedy is that many people misinterpret this awakening as danger instead of healing. Rather than seeing love as the invitation it is, they experience it as a threat to identity. They think, I was fine before this. I was in control before this. I did not feel this vulnerable before this. And because vulnerability feels unsafe, they unconsciously associate the intensity with you as the problem. Not because you are the problem, but because you became the mirror. You became the emotional catalyst. And people often want to escape mirrors that reveal truths they are not ready to face. This is why sometimes the person who loves you most may also be the one who struggles most to move toward you. Love alone does not automatically create emotional maturity. Feeling deeply does not guarantee healthy expression. Someone can love with enormous intensity and still lack the tools to communicate, regulate, trust, or stay emotionally present. This is one of the hardest truths in relationships, especially for emotionally intuitive women. You can feel their love. You can sense the connection. You can recognize what exists beneath the surface. And yet, sensing love does not erase the pain of emotional absence. Understanding their fear does not automatically heal the distance. And this is where your own emotional journey becomes just as important as theirs. Because when someone falls dangerously in love with you, there is a temptation to become consumed by their inner conflict. You start analyzing everything, every silence, every shift in energy, every inconsistency, every small sign. You begin carrying emotional labor for both people. You try to decode what they cannot say. You wait for clarity. You hope love will eventually help them break through their fear. But somewhere along the way, a dangerous pattern can emerge. You begin abandoning yourself while trying to understand them. And love was never meant to require self-abandonment. This matters deeply because while their psychological struggle may be real, your emotional worth cannot depend on when or whether they become ready. This is where many emotionally aware women become trapped. They confuse empathy with responsibility. They think, if I understand their wounds enough, maybe I can love them into safety. But healing does not happen because one person loves hard enough for two. Healing begins when the wounded person chooses honesty over defense, when they stop running, when they stop outsourcing responsibility for their emotional life, when they finally admit the truth. That truth often arrives quietly, usually not in dramatic moments, not through grand declarations, but in the small collapse of resistance, the moment they realize running is exhausting, the moment distance stops protecting them and starts hurting more than vulnerability would, the moment they understand that control has not brought peace, only loneliness. That is often when transformation begins, not when love becomes stronger, but when avoidance becomes unbearable. And if this person truly fell as deeply as their behavior suggests, they are likely moving through that internal reckoning, even if you cannot see it. People do not easily forget someone who touched them at a soul level, especially not someone who activated healing and fear at the same time. That kind of connection leaves an imprint. It lingers in the nervous system. It reshapes emotional memory. Even if they appear composed externally, inner reality can be very different. They may replay moments privately, revisit conversations, feel regret over what they did not say, wonder whether they ruined something meaningful, question whether they were too afraid. At the exact moment, courage was needed. Regret is powerful because it strips away illusion. And here is something remarkable about love that has psychological depth. It continues working inside people, even during separation. Sometimes, the connection keeps teaching them, after distance. Sometimes, losing access to your energy reveals what your presence truly meant. Sometimes, absence becomes the teacher that presence could not be. The heart learns through contrast, through emptiness, through missing what once felt available. This is why some people return, transformed. Not because time magically changed them, but because emotional truth finally broke through their defenses. They reached the end of avoidance and discovered something painful. Protecting themselves from vulnerability also protected them from love, and eventually, the stung cost became too high. But there is another possibility you must also hold with wisdom. Sometimes, the deepest healing does not come from their return. Sometimes, it comes from your release. This is important because emotional maturity means allowing truth to be truth, even when trust does not match desire. Yes, someone may love you intensely. Yes, someone may feel enormous emotional significance with you. Yes, someone may be terrified because of how much they feel. But if they continually choose defense over connection, silence over honesty, fear over growth, then their love remains emotionally incomplete. And incomplete love, no matter how intense, still creates pain. Intensity is not the same as readiness. This distinction changes everything. A person can feel overwhelming love and still be unable to build a healthy connection. Why? Because sustainable love requires more than emotion. It requires emotional responsibility, courage, consistency, capacity, presence, truth. Without these, even powerful love becomes trapped inside fantasy. It stays unspoken, unlived, unfulfilled. So what do you do with that truth? You honor what is real without sacrificing what you need. You stop reducing your worth to their timing. You stop believing their fear is a reflection of your value. You stop carrying the burden of proving you are safe enough, lovable enough, patient enough, understanding enough. Because the truth is, if someone fell dangerously in love with you for these three reasons, then the deepest reality may be simpler than you think. They did not fall because you chased. They did not fall because you convinced. They did not fall because you performed perfection. They fell because your presence awakened emotional truth. You made them feel safe enough to soften. You reflected parts of themselves they had buried, and you became emotionally irreplaceable. Those are not small things. Those are life-changing experiences. And whether this person ultimately rises into courage or remains trapped in fear says more about their inner readiness than about your worth. Read that again in your heart. Their capacity to receive love is their journey. Your value is not on trial. If you have spent nights wondering whether what you felt was real, if you have questioned your intuition because their actions confused you, if part of you feared, you imagined the connection, breathe for a moment and hear this clearly. Sometimes your heart was right about the connection, but being right about the connection does not automatically guarantee the outcome. That is the painful wisdom of love. Connection reveals possibility. Choice creates reality. And love becomes real, not only when it is felt, but when it is chosen, again and again, through action. So if this person is meant to meet you fully, they will eventually have to do what every defended heart must do. They will have to stop hiding behind fear. They will have to grieve old wounds. They will have to release old identity. They will have to let love feel safer than control. And if they do, it will not happen because you forced it. It will happen because truth became impossible for them to deny. And if they do not, you are still not losing your value. You are not hard to love. You are not too much. You are not asking for too much by wanting emotional clarity, consistency, and honesty. In fact, those desires reflect emotional health. The right love will not require you to shrink your needs just to keep someone comfortable in their avoidance. The right love will meet you not perfectly, not without fear, but with willingness, with effort, with truth, with presence. And maybe that is the deepest message hidden inside all of this. The fact that someone fell dangerously in love with you is not only about them. It also reveals something about you. It reveals the power of your emotional presence, your warmth, your intuition, your depth, your ability to touch hearts beyond words. You may not always see your own impact, because what comes naturally to you feels ordinary. But to someone emotionally defended, your emotional honesty can feel revolutionary. Your softness can feel healing. Your presence can feel unforgettable. That is not weakness. That is power in its most human form. So whether this person comes forward tomorrow, months from now, or never, in the way you hoped, let this truth stay with you. You were never insignificant. You were never invisible. You were never just another person in their story. You changed something. You awakened something. And sometimes, the greatest proof of love is not always immediate union. Sometimes, it is the undeniable transformation left behind. If this message found you at the exact moment you needed it, maybe your heart already knew. Maybe part of you needed permission to stop doubting what you felt. And maybe part of you also needed permission to stop carrying what was never yours to carry. Let love reveal truth, but let truth free you. And if someone truly belongs in your life, they will not remain a mystery.